Hello and welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that is looking at issues, constitutional, human rights, and legal issues. We're coming to you live from the National Exhibition and Recreation Centre outside Soweto in Johannesburg, South Africa. My name is Dumila Matez. The policy conference of the ANC has started here in earnest over the last 3 days, and I would want to believe the first 2 days of this conference where they were discussing organizational renewal. Is it the part, Minister, let me introduce my guests first, to be rushing the discussion. The Minister in the Presidency and Head of National Policy in the ANC, and Ms. Lwando Kaso, who is our legal expert, and also another analyst who is always with us here, Susan Boyce from Wits University. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Thank you.
Minister, the first 2 days of this conference was dedicated to organizational renewal. Is this the part that had to be a consultative conference?
Yes, indeed, as the President indicated, as also elaborated by the Secretary General. The first 2 days were dedicated to engaging with the Veterans 101 who came to the ANC that they wanted a consultative kind of conference with us, which we agreed as a National Executive Committee. I think it's now common cause that they have not been part of this. But I must say that there are many veterans who are present in this policy conference. So, but be that as it may, from yesterday and today, we dedicated ourselves to strategy and tactics, organizational issues, and also issues that arise from the opening address of the President that was setting the scene, as well as a diagnostic report. So I suspect that we're going to be in this discussion until late this evening. So where we are reflecting on the challenges that the ANC is facing, but more particularly, what is it that we must do in order to regain lost ground? As you know, last year we lost some metros as the ANC. So we're introspecting, but also forward-looking so that we build a strong organization that must stand up to the challenges that our people are facing.
Susan, I'm actually surprised that the people who raise the issues concerning the organization are not present when the organizational renewal is being discussed.
If you are talking with reference to the veterans, the 101 veterans, I think that is a long and very complicated debate, actually, where they have been stating, and I think they made quite a persuasive case as well, that there needs to be some time between their consultation and the conference, that it cannot just be blended in with conference, because once it's blended in, they will be totally drowned out by the other voices here. And we know strict organizational discipline, control over delegates. The provincial secretaries, several of them themselves have told me that they have been deliberating amongst one another for a few months, if occasionally over a few months now, to ensure that there's discipline set up by this conference. So it cannot honestly be a forum for free exchange of opinions in a strict disorganizational disciplinary context.
Minister, we spoke earlier, many analysts around here have been saying this conference for the ANC is a watershed conference. They compared it to the Morogoro conference of 1969 and the Kabu conference, consultative conference of 1985. Is that the case?
Well, I think we can't compare this one and Morogoro and Kabe. I'm sure people want to live in the past, but now we're in 2017. The challenges that the ANC is facing, our country is those problems around the economy. We need to create jobs. We need to reduce poverty and inequality. I think that's what is dominating the discourse in this conference, so that we can be able to come up with a proper plan, projects and programs in order to ensure that this economy must reflect the demographics of our South African rainbow nation. But I just wanted to take issue with Professor Suzanne that it is not for lack of trying from our side in order to ensure that we come to the party with the Veterans 101. You'll recall that earlier this year, we also had a workshop of policy. We had also invited them to be part of this process, even to go to the branches so that they can engage directly. And I think it's a missed opportunity in the sense that you have members from structures of the organization here, more than 3,000 of them, our alliance partners, and also very important leaders of South African society. It would have been a very important forum for the Veterans 101 to engage them, to influence them, so that we can be able to build the organization. But as we have said, our doors are not shut. going to be continuing the dialogue because we're all members of the ANC and our interest is that of the people of South Africa.
I'm going to bring Luando in here, but I want to find out this question. What do we mean when we talk about policy making and what goes into policy formulation?
Well, it's a two-way process. As you know, we have a policy committee which I'm privileged to chair. So the policy subcommittee starts the process of collecting information, which is then validated by the National Executive Committee, not like to give a rubber stamp, but just to ensure that there is quality check. And then it goes to the structures of the ANC, the branches, the regions, and the provinces. So since early this year, we've been observing a festival of ideas amongst the members of the ANC. But not only members of the ANC, our alliance partners, and also sectors, because it is important to record as well that the policies of the ANC are not of importance to card-carrying members only, but also sectors, even those who are not members of the ANC, but supporting our trajectory of giving effect to the imperatives of the National Development Plan. So the views that will be being collected since yesterday until Wednesday do not only reflect ANC only, but other views of members of South African society.
Londo, the minister says the views or the policies that are being created here at this conference are not only for members of the ANC, it matters for the broader public, for the broader South African public, because this might be turned into law at some stage.
I think if we had to start from the beginning, is that policy formulation must be understood to be part of the executive function. And in this case, the ANC is formulating what would be executive policy at some point. And right now, the courts are not involved because policy, as it is right now, it doesn't affect anyone. It's not final yet. It's not being implemented yet. It's mainly being formulated. In that sense, the judiciary has no role to play, and it can't be that I'm sitting here and I hear something and I want to take someone to court over policy formulation. The courts are loath to intervene at a stage like this, and when it is being formulated into legislation, that's when you start consulting the broader public and holding public participation and consultation and determine that process. If it's consultative, then the bill can become legislation and be passed through. But if it's not, that's when usually we see problems start.
We've seen on many occasions that legislation is taken to Parliament, and there is this interaction between civil society and Parliament to go through the legislation, whatever legislation is. To what extent does the ruling party see to it that all the issues that were discussed at the policy conference resonate with the legislation?
It's a very broad spread process that is out there. And yes, they can change, they can introduce new legislation. It needn't conform to existing legislation. It definitely needs to conform to the constitutional mandate there. But the ANC, and we have to, in considering the work of this policy conference too, we have to consider that we're working with an organization, observing an organization that's been in power for 23 years. And as I say repeatedly in the policy discussion documents, there is a question often of implementation. And if when implementation falls short, then the focus becomes more internal to look at what has gone wrong. And that is where this policy conference has such a huge role. And it indeed has a twofold focus, both on the organization, strategy and tactics, organizational regeneration, renewal, and on the substantive policy issues, because it's people in this organization who are in power and still in power overwhelmingly in South Africa for now, and hopefully they can govern themselves, as they use the word, also out of the mess that they have put themselves in some respects. But that has to go in, and it's those people in this organization that go into government that have to have the ethics and the integrity and the political will and the insight and wisdom to fine-tune and amend policies that have not been reaching the target. That is the challenge that they have to go. So it's a very broad process, and civil society comes in here all the way. Policy really starts in observation of the needs, interpretation of the needs of the society broadly. So it's really supposed to be that starting as a bottom-up process, but then it goes to the executive, and its executive task, exactly, to formulate that and to draft that. And then it goes to legislature, of course, and that is where the legislature, that is one of the big current debates in South Africa. Who does the legislature, those members, including of the ruling party, whom do they actually owe their allegiance to? Is it
we'll come to that. That's a very interesting thing.
Or the party?
We'll come to that. It's a very important thing there is. I just want to ask this question from the Minister. Minister, if we follow that process, that consultative process, in order for legislation to be passed based on the policies, to what extent does the policy get watered down once this whole issue becomes law?
Well, I can indicate that the policy conference that we're having is a forum that recommends to the National Conference of the ANC, which is going to be taking place in December of this year. Once that policy is confirmed by the National Conference of the ANC, then it will be given to those who are deployed in government in order to put effect as an executive action. So, but of course, as Suzanne has indicated, in Parliament, ANC is not the only party there. We're a democratic society in terms of our constitutional democracy. So the processes of Parliament will take its course. Public participation, as Ms. Kaso has indicated, so that we hear other views that may differ from us, but when there is consensus, then we go ahead with that legislation to put effect to the governing party's policy directives.
Well, if you can join us, if you want to join us, you can tweet us at Recourse here as we are discussing the ANC National Policy Conference here at Nasrec, the 5th National Policy Conference, as we are going to be looking at each of the various commissions that are sitting, looking at various policies. Stay with us.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 1000 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur 4th tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Phones, cloud systems and robots have taken over a lot of what used to be done manually.
Our accounting system is actually based on the cloud.
Google nowadays can tell you where you parked your car.
And Africa's entrepreneurs are using technology to create.
With Pocket Masipala, you can basically do all the services that you would do at the municipality physically by going there, but you can now do them on the mobile app.
Join me, Spumelele Zondi, on Sundays at 9 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse here at the Nasrec National Exhibition Centre in Johannesburg, where we discuss the ANC policy conference that is taking place here over the last 5 days, ending, of course, on Tuesday. Minister, panel, let me say panel, let's say Minister, I'm not referring this question to you alone. Analysts believe South Africa's influence from a foreign policy point of view, despite the fact that we have 128 or 126 missions around the world, our influence is waning in Africa. Our influence is waning at the UN and internationally. And we are, for instance, tomorrow, the AU summit is starting and we don't have a representative there, or do we?
Yes, we do have. I do know that the President has appointed our Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Maite Nkwane Mashabane, to lead the South African delegation to the AU tomorrow. So there will be a full full-fledged delegation of the South African government. I do not agree with the perception that the influence of South Africa is waning. If one takes into account the role that our country is playing, not only in SADC and SACU, but also in the AU and also in the United Nations organization. We are represented in almost all the forums at an international level. Our views are being sought out by many countries. You know, recently there was a visit by the President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Our role in terms of peacekeeping efforts in Africa indicates that African countries have trust and confidence in South Africa to assist in ensuring that we are silencing the guns. We are part and parcel of Agenda 2063 in order to ensure that we can be able to have an Africa that is independent and that is prospering. The heads of state of Africa appointed our president to be the champion of the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission. That's a reflection of the confidence they have in South Africa. Recently, in the past 3 years, South Africa was part of the leaders of the group of 100 and plus, group of 77 plus China. So that's a yardstick to judge whether our views are being listened to. Lastly, on the issue of BRICS, we were the only country in Africa that is a member of BRICS, which is a very important constituency if you take into account the GDP that Brazil, China, India, Russia, and South Africa have in terms of the world globe, and also too in terms of the economic governance in the world. So that, I think, we must be judged by what we do.
Susan, I want to say whether we agree or not on this issue of South Africa's influence waning. Do we have a foreign policy deficit?
Oh, I certainly think it amounts to that. Yes. We are just not in a position internationally that we were. And for example, in a period of Thabo Mbeki, some people reckoned he had too much of an external focus, that he was too much all over the world. But he was seen, South Africa had pretty much a hegemonic status at that stage. We might still very much be present in this, that, and that. But our voice as a country, even on the continent, is not as articulated, is not as profound, as present as it was a decade ago. It has been on the wane, even if we can tick the box next to BRICS membership, etc., etc. South Africa has become much more inward-looking in this period.
To what extent, Lwando, did our denigration of the International Criminal Court and our threat of leaving the International Criminal Court affect this foreign policy deficit?
I think with your sort of opening remarks regarding our influence, I think it's not so much waning influence, rather than maybe what the world is seeing is that we are changing our rhetoric on certain things or starting to question certain things, because we were seen as, the miracle, and in terms of the international treaties that we ratified and our strong stance because of our history on certain issues such as human rights, on torture, and with the withdrawal from the ICC, a lot of people are internationally interpreting what that means in terms of our direction. What does it mean in terms of our commitment to justice? And I think it played a huge role in terms of shining the spotlight, because it is understood that we set the tone, South Africa sets the tone on a number of issues, including the ICC, because the ICC was problematic for Africa before the al-Bashir incident. It was problematic in terms of Kenya and the charges against the Kenyan president. And I think by the time the al-Bashir incident happened, we took a definitive decision to withdraw. And I think that has unsettled a lot of players internationally regarding the direction that we're now going in. If not the ICC, then what? How do we uphold justice? And I think, as Susan was saying, it's about looking inwardly, strengthening our own justice system, and also we need to strengthen our regional justice system. And if we think internationally African leaders are being persecuted, maybe it's time for us to strengthen the regional justice system.
It's important, the Minister, I don't know whether you want to take it.
I just want to react on this issue.
You can also add to that, Minister, that this whole thing of strengthening the justice system in Africa, the African Court of Justice, People's Court on Human Rights, has not been, that has not been ratified. Only 27 states have ratified that in Africa.
Well, just to add on that, the decision of the South African government, as well as the AU, as I understand it, is that we need to strengthen that Court of Africa so that we can be able to ensure that when there are abuse of human rights in Africa, they can be prosecuted and punished. We're not moving away from that. But the point I wanted to respond to is that it's not something that is peculiar that South Africa is withdrawing from the International Criminal Court, because we are not abandoning our human rights culture, and also are not saying that we are going to be permitting the abuse, including whoever in Africa, to be violating human rights. If you look at the members of the United Nations Security Council, which is the apex of the United Nations system, United States is not a member of the ICC.
Yes.
China is not a member. India is not, Russia is not. So it's not as if South Africa has done something that is not peculiar. So how does those countries rely in terms of fighting the abuse? So we have to look at the specific conditions as to why. We have explained that. The Minister of Justice has explained it, as well as the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation.
I want to move away from this foreign policy thing to go to something else, but I just want to ask the question. I made the distinction the other day. I was talking to some people about South Africa's influence. I said South Africa could claim the permanent seat in the Security Council by virtue of it being the founding member of the United Nations. Why are we not doing that?
Well, I think it's part and parcel of the reform of all institutions of global governance, both politically as well as economic. So I think that's the question that has to be decided by the United Nations itself. We have the Ezulwini consensus, a position of the African Union of ensuring that we have to campaign for Africa to have a seat at the United Nations Security Council, because it's very odd that a continent that has almost 1 billion population does not have even a single seat. All this is being determined by people who were appointed there in the 1940s. So there has to be change. There has to be transformation in all these institutions that are responsible for governing the world.
Wando, I've always raised this matter, especially when we discuss the International Criminal Court, why would we allow the Security Council, the members of the Security Council, to refer cases to the International Criminal Court when they themselves are not signatories to the Rome Statute?
Part of my speciality is also international law, and in as much as I'm a dedicated student of international law, it can be a very disappointing subject to delve into, because you realize there are a lot of inconsistencies and double standards, and also that the United Nations itself is not as democratic as we'd like to think. And also during the time of Kofi Annan, he tried to introduce some reforms, but obviously people are going to push back against that. So that's definitely something that needs to happen for people to look at the UN and those structures as legitimate. And the ICC issue cannot be seen in isolation from those inconsistencies in the UN, because if the Security Council issue is determined, if the reform is actually pushed forward, it can do a lot to boost confidence into other structures that sort of rely on a democratic United Nations. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and I know it's one of Kofi Annan's biggest disappointments that he wasn't able to move the needle forward. And power is hard to give up. Those permanent members, for them to convince them that they should give up, it's a big power to be able to veto some of the things that they see. And also they play politics with really human issues, that they're able to block certain resolutions because it doesn't satisfy their own national interests. So at every level you can see problems, and it also then filters down to us in the direction that we want to take.
I just want to going away from the foreign policy, I want to touch on the economic policy, and I want to tie it to the foreign policy. I said earlier we have 128 missions around the world. From an economic point of view, what is it that we are getting from these countries with whom we have diplomatic relations?
Quite often nothing. With diplomatic missions and the number you have, it normally is used to indicate some status of a country. But we know we've come in for a lot of criticism for a wide range of South Africa's missions abroad, costing an arm and a penny and really being a social circuit, nice, cultivate good relations. Well, maybe that is an important part of diplomacy, but many of these missions cost an inordinate amount of money. So I do not think South Africa's returns on these missions are exactly in proportion to the expenditure on it.
Minister?
Well, our view is completely different from what Professor Suzanne is saying. Let's remember that we are coming from the system of apartheid that was a pariah in the system of the United Nations. In fact, the ANC even had more foreign missions during the era of apartheid than the apartheid government. So it cannot be true, therefore, that when we're now a constitutional democracy, we should shut down the world like it did with the system of apartheid. We need to embrace the world because it is through our foreign policy that we can be able to have friends so that they can be able to invest in South African economy and vice versa. So that is why our foreign policy stance is informed by our economic diplomacy. That is the key issue that we're dealing with. That is why number one priority of all our foreign missions is to do business with those countries and attract foreign direct investment into our country and also to bring tourists. That is why our foreign missions have assisted in ensuring that in 2014 we've been able to have about 372 billion rand of tourism impact in the South African economy, which has risen now to 375 billion rand in 2015. And also the number of tourists who are coming to South Africa have risen from 9 million to about 29 million. So that's a very staggering figure indicating that our foreign policy is giving the results that we want. And lastly, also in terms of the economy, we want to do business with Africa. That is why our foreign policy says that we need to ensure that we have this regional economic integration in Africa. We need also to remove all barriers that stand in the way for intra-African trade. That's why this issue of free trade area is on the agenda on the African continent so that we can be able to do business with ourselves, unlike in the colonial era where we had relations with our colonial masters than our brothers and sisters on the African continent.
Is it on the agenda here?
I really just wish to say that I do not advocate by any stretch of the imagination become isolationist, etc. I say look at the cost of those missions. One doesn't need a full diplomatic mission in a country in order to encourage tourism and trade. So it's a cost of that, and perhaps it is the capacity of people deployed into these missions. Too often there are appointments of has-been politicians or former XYZ discredited politicians in quite a number of cases who just do not have the reputation and capabilities to do the jobs to the best that is required.
Rwanda, year in and year out, and throughout the years, the Statistician General releases these figures of unemployment. The one figure that really hit me in the face was the youth unemployment in this country. It's a ticking time bomb in an economy that is not growing, that is growing at less than 1%, and also in the fact that we seem to be moving from one plan to the next. In 2010, we had the new growth plan, and then we now have a national development plan. When are we going to implement all of these plans?
Minister?
Well, before I respond to your question, I do not agree with Professor Suzanne that we have people who are useless in our foreign missions. When the president appoints people, he also looks at other political parties, not only the ANC. That is why Tony Leon was our ambassador in Argentina and many, many others. They are doing a sterling work in promoting South African investment as well as tourism. So on the issue of what we've just indicated, we have one plan in South Africa. That is the National Development Plan, our Vision 2030. That is the plan that was approved by the governing party at its last conference in Mangaung in 2012. It was approved by cabinet. It was approved by our own parliament by acclamation. How are we implementing it? In 2014, we started the first 5-year plan of implementing the National Development Plan, which we call a medium-term strategic framework, with 14 outcomes, starting with education, with health, economy, human settlement, social cohesion, and nation building. Every quarter, the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation makes an assessment on what has been done to implement this NDP. Yesterday, on Friday, I made a presentation at this conference indicating the summary of what we have done as the South African government in implementing the NDP. But I want to record as well that this plan cannot be successful if it is seen as a government plan only. That is why we require collaboration, partnership with the private sector, with labor and organs of civil society. We talk about jobs, yes. We are not creating as much jobs as we want. 75% of this economy is controlled by the private sector, so they have a bigger responsibility to come to the party so that we can be able to create jobs. But more than that, we need also to transform our institutions, especially of higher learning, post-school education, so that we can be able to have a collaboration between the Department of Education, Higher Education and Training with the industry, even curriculum, so that we design curriculum that must meet the demands of the industry.
Well, if you want to join us, you can join us on Twitter. Twitter us at Recourse. When we come back, we'll probably have to go somewhere. Griselda Lewis is standing by to talk to the chairman or the chairperson of the African National Congress, Ms. Baleka Mbete.
We are certain in giving an update on all leading stories.
You see South Africa has a yellow palette which indicates a warning color on this index.
We are first to give market updates.
And the more the currency is under pressure, also our costs go up.
We always give you the best guests to keep you informed and sharpen you for the day ahead.
You got to find something people are willing to pay for, that they need now, and they have the money to pay for it. The minute you tick those 3 boxes, you're in business.
Sports Roundup to fill you in.
985 is not the end. For me, it's going faster than the 985 and keep improving the record.
Never start your day without Morning Live if you need a perfect dress guide for the day.
Parts of KZN into Kokstad, we're seeing those 4 patches. Please drive carefully.
Set the agenda for the day with Morning Live.
Welcome back. Just a quick note to my colleague Dumila Mateza that I'm actually Lukhanyo Thalata and not Griselda Lewis. But yes, we continue to broadcast from Nasrec Expo Center, where the ANC is holding its 5th National Policy Conference. I'm now joined by the chairperson of the ANC, Baleka Mbete, who also in her other role serves as the Speaker of the National Assembly. Ma'am, good afternoon and thanks very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Lukhanyo, and thanks for inviting me, and good afternoon to the listeners.
All right. Ma'am, from the ANC side, as the chairperson, let's talk about the first 2 days of the National Policy Conference. Are you satisfied with how things have progressed thus far?
Largely satisfied, Lukhanyo. Of course, we lost a bit of time on the first day. You can imagine we're dealing with more than 4,500 people here. So I think we lost 2 hours initially, and therefore we had to spill into the next day in terms of the plenary, and finished off the plenary sitting yesterday morning. But everything went well. Discussions are very healthy, constructive. The tone of engagement and as people are moving around is a very positive one. And since yesterday afternoon, we have broken into commissions, and I think that our commissions are going very well. I was sitting in my commission, which is the commission that will end up dealing with legislatures and governance. But of course, all commissions are discussing the same matter, that is the strategy and tactics and the organizational renewal of the ANC.
Ma'am, before we talk about the strategy and tactics and as well as the organizational renewal, I just quickly want to touch on the issue of the diagnostics report by the Secretary General. Yes. That report paints a picture of an ANC that is not as well as it should or as it could be. Mm-hmm. Your take on that, ma'am?
Well, the report is a mirror of what we as the National Executive Committee, as we went around to our structures after the outcomes of the local government elections of 2016 had been announced, what we began to find as we were interacting with our structures and as well as interacting with our communities in general. So it's not necessarily a picture that's going to be making us look very pretty. It's just going to be honest. These are your challenges. This is what is happening. But you must also have a broader understanding of what the issues are. Because very often we end up at each other's throats because we also tend to have a very myopic understanding of the challenges that are plaguing the organization. And yet we should know that these things have happened elsewhere. They take different forms according to the specifics of a situation, of a country, of a society, and it's happening to us here in South Africa now.
Ma'am, one of the challenges that the diagnostic report made bare is, for instance, the issue of a decline in the ideological outlook. The decline in the ideological outlook of the ANC. There's issues with ethics of branches. There's issues of values. Branches no longer holding or espousing the traditions of the ANC. You are part of a leadership that has to oversee this state of the ANC. How do you rectify it? Where do you begin to rectify some of these issues that have been pointed out?
As the ANC, we do believe that our culture stands us in good stead when such matters and challenges come up and are facing us. One, that is a culture of honest discussion, of brutal criticism and self-criticism that is expressed at properly constituted meetings of the African National Congress branches and other structures, that things are put on the table as they are, not destructively, not adversarially, but honestly, so that we can deal with the issues as they are. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have to have the correct institutions to assist us to deal with such problems. And one such mechanism, of course, is the disciplinary structure that we have in the ANC, which is part and parcel of our constitutional mechanisms. So that body would then receive those issues that are correct to be taken up there, and then they will take them forward and pronounce accordingly. Lastly, we do have an integrity commission. You will have seen the old men, Tatem Langeni, Comrade Frini Jinwala, who are members of the Integrity Commission, who assist us with various types of such challenges that you are referring to.
All right, ma'am, and then this conference also comes at a time when the ANC and the ANC-led government is facing a daunting economical prospects at financial issues. There's the technical recession that we're currently in. There's issues of the declining economy. What does this policy need to do to restore the financial health of the country that obviously the ANC is governing?
You will be aware that already our government is handling that matter largely through our treasury, where our main deployee, the Minister of Finance, Malusi Gigaba, is leading the process of looking at what is it we need to unlearn, what is it we need to learn, where do we strengthen, where exactly are the areas where we should go look for improving our prospects at improving the fortunes of our economy. But as the ANC, we continue in the form of different deployees that are in government, in other ministries apart from the finance ministry, but we also have the Economic Transformation Commission here, which is chaired by Enoch Godongwana. They are always seized with these issues of continuing to interact with other sectors of society, especially in business, to find solutions, because it's a challenge that faces not just the ANC but the whole society, and therefore even business itself has to come on board to talk to us, and collectively we must find the answers to what faces us.
All right, ma'am. Finally, last question. There's the issue in Parliament of the motion of no confidence. I understand that there's a possibility that the date may have been moved to the 8th. So have you discussed, and what has been the response from the ANC on the issue of a secret ballot?
The ANC's position is that the possibility of it becoming a secret ballot or continuing to be in the same way that we've done in the past really is no major issue, because what the ANC is saying is we know how to vote. We will never support a vote of no confidence in our own leader. And therefore create chaos in government, because what it would mean is that the head of state and the cabinet must resign. And therefore the ANC MPs are very clear that they are not going to vote for that. It does not matter whether it's a secret ballot or not a secret ballot. And of course that matter has not yet been decided.
Okay, so it hasn't been decided yet. Yes. All right, ma'am. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us. Thanks. That was the chairperson of the ANC, Ubaleka Mbete, talking to us about firstly the National Policy Conference, as well as the fact that she hasn't yet decided on whether or not the motion of no confidence to be held in Parliament on the 8th of August, on the 8th of August will be via secret ballot. For now, let me throw you back to my colleague Dumila Mateza in studio.
Thank you, Lukhanyo Kalata. My apologies for calling you Griselda. Ladies and gentlemen, I want us to take the last part of that discussion, the issue of the secret ballot, or let's take it to the... We were sitting in a press conference earlier where this issue was discussed by Fikile Mbalula, the Minister of Police, around how the ANC members should vote. I raised the question and asked, as the Chief Justice said, the members, first of all, of Parliament, should pay allegiance to the Constitution, because when they are sworn in, they swear to the Constitution and not to the ANC Constitution. But we heard something different from Minister Mbalula.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Mbalula was quite outspoken. He used very colourful language, like suggesting these people should any ANC MPs be voting again in favor of a motion of no confidence, they would basically be committing suicide. And then he also said that the ANC is not a beer hall where you can choose your brand and see what they do there, but that the ANC is running an organization. There was no question there of the discipline that will be enforced. And that was in line with Sihle Zikalala's point that he made yesterday, where he said those MPs will be in trouble. ANC MPs, should they support a motion of no confidence. And that is a very important moment for those MPs. Several members of caucus have publicly expressed themselves against the president. And there is a grouping, I do not think it is by far a majority in that caucus, but it is a grouping in that who have been considering, maybe are still considering, to support a motion of that nature. I think they are running and making medical appointments in order to be absent from Parliament on that day.
Let me throw it to the Minister, who was once a Minister of Justice and the custodian of the Constitution. Minister, this whole issue of being a Member of Parliament, when we are sworn in, you swear allegiance to the Constitution of the country and not to the Constitution of the ANC. But we had something different today. Is that what the
Well, I think the first point to be recorded is that the Constitutional Court is an apex court and is a court of last resort, and any decision of the Constitutional Court is binding on all South Africans, even on this case. So the Chief Justice judgment is binding on all of us, including members of the ANC. So it is correct that our first allegiance is to the Constitution. That is why from the President to ministers, members of Parliament, that is it. But our system of constitutional democracy is that we elect members of Parliament on a party ticket, which means that each member of the ANC has to be voted in by its own members to go to Parliament. So when you are in Parliament, you are under the jurisdiction of the ANC. That's why we have what is called ANC caucus. So this is not unique to the ANC. Opposition parties, they've got their own caucus, and I do note also to that in the rules of the DA, if you vote any other thing, they fire you. Our Rule 25 of the Constitution of the ANC makes it a disciplinary offense to vote with other parties. So that is the rule. So therefore, the national chairperson is correct when he says that you cannot just vote with other political parties. If you want to do this, leave the ANC and join those parties that you can vote as you please. So if there is a directive of the ANC, the duty of members is to execute that mandate.
Interesting, Luando, this very issue that the Minister is talking about here, the door was closed on floor crossing in an application that was made by the very UDM. And now, I want to, before you answer, collectively, just close on this. The Chief Justice further goes on to say in the ruling that the powers and resources assigned to each arm of state cannot be used for the advancement of sectarian interests. Slogans like Amandla Ngawethu and Maibuye Africa are much more than exciting generation slogans. They convey a profound reality of state power. The land and its wealth all belong to we, the people. Now, where does this problem lie, whether members of Parliament should swear allegiance to the Constitution of the country, and then when there is sectarian problems, no, they must swear allegiance to the Constitution of the party?
First of all, let me say I'm very comforted by the Minister's opening remarks on the Constitutional Court judgment being binding and it's accepted by the ruling party. Often the rhetoric isn't as comforting in terms of the relationship between the court and the government. So that's very good to hear. But on separation of powers, it's usually understood as a government judiciary issues, but it's never also understood as in terms of public officers and the duties that they have, and that there are difficulties that come with wearing two hats and not knowing at what point are you a parliamentarian representing the people or a politician representing your party, and when to wear that specific hat. And it's a tension that has been brought to the fore by some of the judgments we've seen from the court in terms of the motion of no confidence, and having various people comment that it's not democratic to vote in a secret ballot, and also that it's misconduct in terms of, as we heard earlier, the constitution of a political party. But as you said, over and above, when you're casting that vote of no confidence, you're doing it as a parliamentarian. And I think that's where the South African constitutional design can be tricky to navigate, because we elect a party which then sends members to Parliament, and then at the same time you are seen as being representative of the people, the people that you're talking about, and wanting to implement the people's views. So I think that tension comes from the two roles that are played by parliamentarians, and at what moment is the ANC constitution binding, at what moment are the people's views binding or the parliamentarians' view binding. And I think another issue, it was quite interesting that Lukhanyo asked the chairperson about the UDF judgment, because was he asking her as the speaker or the chairperson? And I'm thinking the speaker. And one of the things that the judgment said is that when she is considering the secret ballot, she must consider her own impartiality, which is quite interesting. Can she be partial when deciding if the vote should be conducted in secret or not? And I must say that that constitutional court judgment was skillful, and it also pays credence to their understanding of separation of powers, because it said we can't order her to do this. Just like in the EFF judgment, it said we can't order an impeachment. So clearly this is a court that understands its limits, and I think the way they crafted the judgment by giving, I think it was six points that the speaker has to consider to get to her decision, it almost sets up a follow-up court case should she not order a secret ballot, because after reviewing all those 6 things, if she doesn't come to that conclusion, it's for the UDM to then bring a case again. So very interesting times.
At the time we have, Minister, I went through all the documents during the last couple of weeks in the June month and May. And for the sake of me, I was trying to find the word coalition. Is the ANC not thinking that it might go into coalition at some stage? Might have to go into coalition at some stage?
No, we are there as political parties to win power on behalf of the people. So that's why, as the ANC, we are very determined that we are going to continue being a governing party in South Africa, as people have shown overwhelmingly their confidence into the organization. So that's why in this policy conference, we want to come up with policies that are going to enhance our fight against poverty, unemployment, and inequality.
Minister Jeff Radebe, Head of Policy at the ANC and Minister in the Presidency, Luando Klauso, an expert in international law, Professor Susan Buesen from the Wits University. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a riveting discussion. I quite enjoyed it. I did not prepare for it the way I would have wanted to, but unfortunately we have to do with what we have. From all of us in the studio here at NASREC, the ANC Policy Conference continues in earnest from tomorrow, and all of these things, I believe, will be discussed by the members who are here, who are delegates of various branches from around South Africa. From all of us from here at NASREC, goodbye.